it's my honor on behalf of the Coordinating Council to welcome you to ITD, and we're going to get started with our first plenary. Dr. Karyn Harvey has worked as a clinician in the field of intellectual disabilities for over 35 years. She has her PhD in applied development psychology from the University of Maryland. She has written 3 books: Positive Identity Development, Trauma-Informed Behavioral Interventions, and Trauma and Healing. She currently does individual and group therapy with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And in addition, she regularly conducts trainings on trauma-informed support for people with IDD, trauma-informed leadership, and trauma-informed behavioral interventions for both state and individual organizations throughout the US and Canada. Dr. Harvey's work is especially important to this community as we are called to provide support and counsel to many individuals with lived experiences of disabilities and those who love them, who have been victims of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Trauma-informed care, healing, and resilience are ways faith communities can support people who are survivors. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Karyn Harvey.
Thank you. I love Shelley. Thank you. It's such an honor to speak for the Institute. And thank you, Ben. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Bill. Gaventa. I've admired his work for so long, and now, Bill and Shelley, and I'm so honored to be here. And I'm honored to be here with all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you for all you do. And I want to thank you, and hello in Zoom land. Hi. Thank you so much. The challenges. One big thank you. The most important thing I have to say today is thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Thank you for your heart. Thank you for understanding and valuing spirituality. Thank you for everything that you did personally through this pandemic. Right? Oh my goodness. So I feel like I can't begin to talk about trauma without talking about the trauma of COVID. And I know that every single person here and out there, hi, every single person did something amazing for somebody that nobody else knows about. Because I can feel it. And there's a beautiful saying by Nichiren Daishonin. And he says, he was a Buddhist scholar in the 13th century. And he says, unseen virtue brings visible reward. And I know all of you had things that nobody else saw that you did, people you reached out to, a hand you shared, someone who was alone that you connected with. So I want to thank you all for your unseen virtue, because I know it's true. And congratulate yourselves. Yes. Yay for you. Oh, and I forgot to describe myself, by the way. I'm so grateful to be here. And I used to say middle-aged, not anymore. Inching towards old. My friend told me there's young old and there's old old. Okay, I'm in the young old, not quite middle-aged. I have curly brown hair and a big smile and a kind of a clown type face. Okay. So just to describe myself. So I believe that there were 3 phases that we went through in this pandemic. The first one was terror, right? Do you remember washing your groceries? Right? What? Right? My husband threw them all in the sink one time. I'm like, stop, there's cardboard in there. It just turned on the water. We were panicked. We put our mail in the sun. I don't think it did any good to put your mail in the sun. And the hunt for toilet paper still on, evidently. Thank you so much for helping. Right? All of that unseen virtue. I can't really guarantee the visible reward, but hopefully eventually. But thank you. There was that phase of fear. There was the phase of isolation. And then there was what I believe we're still going through, which is the anxiety. And I have to say, when I'm talking about trauma, that this really affected people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. so many who were just starting to really get in their community, getting that job, getting that life, right? And then pulled back. One woman said to me, well, now you know what we've been through all these years when we were all shut down. And I did a lot of therapy. I'm a therapist, and I work with folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I did a lot of groups. I did 3 groups for a year with folks with disabilities, and they would say, when can we go back? When can I see my friends? And some would say, when can I see my family? Right? And it was a tough time. And many of you were there for people. Thank you. But the reality was very hard. And what we are going through now is we're still in the throes of the pandemic because of the anxiety. In many places where I consult, there's a number of people who refuse to go back to their program, who are not getting back to the integration level they were at, and who are also grieving. And the problem is we don't always address those needs. You all get it. And this conference is so exciting because you do get it. But we have so far to go. So in between the variants, Delta and Omicron, there was a conference that I went to in North Dakota, right? So I have a little story about this conference. I have many little stories, and I promise not to go over because break is the most important part. Break, lunch, and dinner. So, and coffee. That's right. So I respect that. Don't worry. But I went to this conference in North Dakota, right? And I had to give a talk. Well, this was funny because you know how, hi there, Zoom people. You know, I was just doing webinars for like a year, right? We were just screaming into the computer, and I'd just see people like on their computers or blank screens, and I'd be, hello, trying to get people's attention, kind of over the top and ridiculous. And then so I went to my first live conference, and I gave my first talk, and I was like, hi, everybody. And then I realized I had to tone it down because I was just trying to get the attention of people in a computer for so long. So that was the first day. And then I was supposed to do a workshop, and it was supposed to be about how the pandemic affected people with disabilities, right? And I was like, oh, I'm an expert. I know what I'm doing. Let me tell you all about how it affected people. I did groups. I did individual therapy from Zoom. I know. I had my PowerPoint. That's the key to being an expert, right? You have a PowerPoint. So I had the PowerPoint all together, and I was like, okay, let me tell you, this is how it is. And in my workshop, one person after another with a disability came. They all walked in with staff. And I was like, oh, the experts are here. I better not show that PowerPoint. Uh-oh. I mean, I make a lot of mistakes. But one thing I know is not to talk about people with them right there as though you know more than them, right? Like, through the years, I've figured that out. And so I just passed the mic around. And I said, how are you? How have you been? How are you doing? And there was this one little guy, his name was Philip, right? And he was in a wheelchair. He said, I used to be crippled and now I have Parkinson's. I was like, oh. But he said, I'll tell you about it. And Philip was a voice, I will never forget his voice. I will never forget that day, because he said, here's how it was. First of all, they shut down the day program. I get to see my friends. I love the day program. And we drink coffee. 1 cup. We have a nice time. Sometimes we play games. No day program. And then we couldn't go bowling. We couldn't go grocery shopping. Gina went by herself. So we sat, we watched some movies. That was okay. But then Jimmy got sick. And Jimmy went to the hospital, and we had to go to our rooms. And we had to stay in our rooms. He was quarantined, right? And you could tell it was still scary and still hadn't really been explained. We had to eat in our rooms. We just came out to go to the bathroom, take a shower, go right back. But then Jimmy came back. That was better. But then Johnny got sick. And he was in the hospital for a long time. We were back in our rooms. He finally came back. We was okay. We took walks. It was warmer then. And then Linda got sick. And he shook his head. She never came back. And right at that time, the staff person sitting next to him started crying. And at that moment, I saw her pain, her trauma, and his. And at the very end of the session, everybody shared, right? People were talking about who they lost. People were talking about, what they did and what they didn't do. And I said, who would like to sum this up? And Philip raises his hand again, right? I give Philip the mic. Yes, please. He said, live life to the fullest. Thank you, Philip. Wasn't that the lesson? Live life to the fullest. And then afterwards, I talked with Philip and Gina. And Gina said, I'm so sorry. I said, please don't apologize. She said, but I haven't cried. I just kept it in. I had to keep going. Which is so many people and so many of the staff, and we ask so much of so many, and family members. We ask so much. I got a phone call from a mom who has a 35-year-old son with autism, and she said, I need your help. I know you can't come see him. She's on the other side of Washington, D.C., almost 2 hours away from me. I'm north of Baltimore. But my son is destroying the house. He's tearing everything up. And he's saying it's my fault that he can't go to work. He had worked so hard to finally get a job. He had gotten a job about 6 months before at Marshall's. I love Marshall's. I found out that Marshall's is everywhere, even in Canada. When I tell the story, it's here, right? You have Marshall's. Oh, well. So, and he was in the baggage department, and he was very proud of that job. But when COVID happened, COVID stopped everything, of course, and he went ballistic because he needed his routine. He worked Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And he worked 4 hours every day, and he stocked the purses and the luggage, and he checked everything, and he cleaned up. And then all of a sudden he didn't. So he was very upset. And his job coach started coming back. She was lovely. And she started coming to the house. And I started Zooming with him. And she decided I'm going to walk with him, because what he thought that Marshall's was still open and this was their way of getting rid of him. And he said in the therapy, this is what happens to me. This is what happened to me in high school. I'd join a club and then they'd change the club and I wouldn't be a part of it anymore. They'd say they changed the rules. And all that trauma came up. And that's so many folks, right? And so his staff, she said, we're going to walk to Marshall's and I'll show you that it's closed, right? So we walked, she walked. I didn't walk. I say we. I just sat there and heard about it in my nice cozy little office. So they walked to Marshall's. He saw that it was shut down and he felt a little better. And then we processed that, right? And then everything was supposed to open up in June, remember? So he was excited. Oh, Marshall's is opening back up. But they didn't ask him back. So then, see, they don't want me. And we processed that. Well, they need a skeletal crew. We talked about that for a while. They can't have a lot of people. They don't have a lot of people coming. But then in July, they asked him back. And this was so great, right? He tried for years to get a job and had finally gotten this job. But they only wanted him one day. And he's like, it's okay, they need me. And he went there, and his job was not the luggage anymore, right? Or the purses, because nobody is traveling. Hardly anyone's buying a new purse, right? Oh, thank you. His job was to wash down the carts. And he was really mad about that. He's like, why am I doing that? I'm like, oh, you're saving lives. So we reframed, right? And that job coach worked so well with him. And he got okay. He kind of got a routine down. And then about 6 months later, she quit. And this is the story of so many people, right? And she could make a lot more money in other places. And she was precious and she was wonderful, but she was not well paid. And I believe that COVID really brought into bold relief the issues we have in the disability world. You know, that isolation, that difficulty, and now that anxiety continues. And it's continuing. So it kind of forced us to look and to see. And we lost staff everywhere. There was one place that didn't lose staff. It's a place that I work with in Saskatchewan, Canada, and they do gentle teaching based on John McGee. But what they decided to do, gentle teaching is an approach of really love and care and nurturing. And they decided to use it with the staff. And every staff gets supported. People are invited to create programs around what their interests are. People are praised. People are celebrated. Their turnover was 4%. I learned from them. But so now for more depressing stuff, I promise I'm going to cheer you up at some point. Maybe not quite yet. But the reality, and I feel compelled to talk about it, is that trauma is the elephant in the room. You know, trauma really is the elephant in the room. And there's so many sources of trauma for folks with intellectual disabilities. Tragically, we know the statistics, right? Joe Shapiro did a wonderful series on NPR just about intellectual disabilities. So he was the first person to talk about the sexual abuse of people with just intellectual disabilities. Often it's all disabilities, right? And he went to the Bureau of Justice and he said, will you please do a report about all the sexual assaults in the last 10 years and how many people had just intellectual disabilities. And they came back to him and they said, people with intellectual disabilities are 7 times more likely to be sexually abused than people without. And honestly, that number is very low. And the reason that number is low is because often people don't report. I've been in situations with the police there, with somebody who was non-speaking, and we're saying, we know them, we know they're communicating with us, and we know this happened. Sorry, can't do anything about it. Right? That's happened so many times. So the sexual abuse is very high. A recent study by Thomas was international. They did an international literature review in 2021. And they looked throughout the world, and they concluded that 1 out of 3 adults are likely to be sexually abused. As adults. Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. No, not that I know of. Not that I know of. They reported it in general. My experience, though, I am always the therapist doing the crisis counseling afterwards. And females, I have many more females refer to me than males. But I've worked with a number of males who've been sexually abused. And for 2 years, and please ask questions. This is good because I just go on and on. And this will motivate me to stop early for more questions. Thank you. But in my experience, I have worked with predominantly women, and I get referred women with sexual assaults. But for years, I did 2 groups of therapy with sex offenders with intellectual disabilities, and every single one of them had a history of sexual abuse. So my guess is that they don't always come forward. But in the context of treatment for their offenses, I would always fight for them not to go. The court would refer them to a clinic called the Berlin Clinic, where they would be with people without disabilities and where they would be chemically castrated, right, Depo-Provera, which almost always caused osteoporosis, definitely caused osteopenia, weakness of the bones from that med. And they were with people who, without intellectual disabilities, who were, some of them, very scary. And so we fought very hard, and we started groups so that the court could refer them to us. Hey, we're just rolling with it. So speaking of rolling, and that's when those histories of sexual abuse came out. So these people weren't coming to us, and they weren't disclosing until we actually did the work. And they said, well, this is what happened to me. And that was their first experience of stimulation, was adult to child. So that was the template, right? And that's what seemed normal. And in fact, interestingly enough, what really was most effective with those guys, of course, I'd like to say it was my groups and our therapy, but most effective was when they could have a consenting sexual relationship. And then they realized, oh, I can have a relationship with an adult and I'm okay, and I can be stimulated, and I can give love, and I can be a part of this world in that. So, we started really fostering relationships and supporting relationships. I ran a singles group for years. Now I'm a part of a dating app. Hello, it's me. That's what it's called. I'm so excited. Okay, sorry. I have to contain myself. All right, I have gone so off the track, but that's okay. Welcome to my world. But I really believe that when we go deeper, it's both genders, and it's as though folks have a target on their back. And I'm so sorry to say that, but that's why we need so much more sex education, right? Unfortunately, so many people I work with were excluded from the sex education in their schools. Well, that's the special ed class and they don't need it. Or they're treated like children, right? When they are adults. So this is an issue, and these are important things to address. I'm going to tell you a story because I can't stop telling stories. I feel like I just carry all these people with me and their stories, and I have to tell them. So I want to tell the story of Rashida, because Rashida was someone with a history of sexual abuse. And this is a horrible story, so I should be giving trigger warnings. Trigger warning. Sorry, it's too late. Sorry, guys. Oh, I guess you're in the camera too. Sorry. But some parts are upsetting, but the endings are good because people do heal from trauma. It takes a long, long time, and it takes a lot of support. So I'm going to tell you about Rashida. Her mother was pregnant and locked up on drug charges. I never knew exactly what it was. She had her baby in jail. Baltimore City, right? You put a pregnant woman in jail for minor charges. What are you doing? You create ripples of trauma. They tell her, please designate someone to take care of your baby or else the baby's going into foster care. Her sister stepped up and said that she would take care of the baby. She also had her toddler son. But the baby screamed and cried all the time, as most babies would, taken away from their mother, right? And the woman lost it and shook her. And Rashida was that baby, and she got shaken baby syndrome. So now the aunt is in jail and the mother. And Rashida goes into foster care. And she's legally blind, and she has brain damage as a result of being shaken, probably more than once. So Rashida then goes into several foster care placements. She has a hard time in foster care. One foster care placement, she told me how she never got enough to eat. And I said, why didn't you tell your worker? And she said, well, because I didn't know how bad the next one would be. So she stayed. And Rashida, when then finally her mom got sober, they reunited her. She went home with her mother. She was there for a couple years, and then, I'm sorry to say this is tough, but these are stories I hear a lot, unfortunately. Her brother sexually abused her. She told, and the family cut her off. How could you do that? Now Joe is in juvie because of you. Now he's in the Hickey school. It's your fault. She gets back into foster care. She ages out. She's in the agency where I'm working. And then one day she begins cutting herself. And so often people say, oh, they do that for attention. Or it's the endorphins, right? Here's why. She's bowling with her staff, and 3 lanes down, she sees a birthday party for her niece. And she goes over there. Why don't you guys invite me to the party? Why don't you guys talk to me anymore? Why am I not here with you guys? I love my niece. And they started saying, you know what's happened to Joe. You know it's all your fault. And they get into it. She goes home, starts cutting herself. And what do the staff say? They say she's doing it for attention. And how many times have I heard that? Not looking at all those layers of trauma. But I'm going to tell you why I'm so excited to be here today and what happened with Rashida. So two important things happened to her on her healing journey. Number one, when she went into that adult program, we did all kinds of work with her. We did EMDR, which is a type of trauma therapy, and we did that work, and we kept doing it. And it was a slow process. She would say she wanted to hurt herself. She'd go to the hospital maybe 3-4 times a year. You know, we're making slow progress. And then there was a job coach who really believed in her. And this job coach said, you know, Rashida should be on the list of people who could work. She was on the other list because she would go to the day program and sleep all day. And she was on a lot of meds. I'd be sleeping too. She said, but no, you know, she's really smart. This job coach saw her and believed in her. Said, I think she can work. And she sat down and started meeting with her and talking to her. And she found out that Rashida loved kids and that Rashida wanted to work with kids. And this one person believed in her, and that changed everything because she was written off by everybody else. You know, she's attention seeking, she's a cutter, she's this, she's that. And we're doing therapy, but it's so slow. Your therapy doesn't work, right? I've heard that before. Many times. But, you know, it takes time. What can I say? But that job coach believed in her, helped her to get the very basic certificate to do childcare. Rashida got a job. She got a job doing childcare. And one of her coworkers at the job connected her to a church. And Rashida joined a church that she finally felt she belonged in, a place she was embraced. And that coworker would bring her. She went out of her way. And Rashida would talk in therapy about her community, her church community, and about the activities. A whole nother person came out between the job and purpose and meaning, and then that spiritual community. She blossomed. She said, I don't want to live in this agency anymore. I don't like you people. And she got her service coordinator to get her moved. And then she reconciled with her mother and her sister. And she moved back home for a period, but then her sister moved in with her 5 kids, so that didn't really work out too well. And she was able to get an apartment where she has drop-in staff now. She sees her mom regularly. She goes to church. She had to find a different church because it was far away, but she has built another community, and she has a girlfriend. Yeah! Rashida! And she fired me, by the way. Yeah, that was good. I'm like, yes, sweetie, you're good. Because she moved so far away and she's like, I want to go see somebody where the psychiatrist, she got a new psychiatrist who took her down, down, down. Meds are very low now because she found meaning and purpose, and she had that spiritual community. And even what amazed me was so beautiful that I thought, oh no, she's not going to be able to go to this church now and she's not at that job. She found herself another job near her mom and this apartment, and it's a job working with kids with special needs. It's amazing. So she found the place and applied, and they took her. That purpose, that meaning. And then I was worried, okay, she's not going to be with her spiritual community. This is going to be so hard. No, because she connected with God. She connected with her community. She connected with people. She belonged. She was able to assimilate right into another one. And she has a church now. And that was one of the things we talked a lot about in therapy. Okay, now how are we going to find? She did it. She took care of it. So people do heal, even some of the most horrific situations. But what I found, and I eventually will talk about, is they heal because they have someone who believes in them. They heal because somebody sees them. And somebody says, I know you. I see you. You're valuable. You count. And that's been my experience of seeing the staff, the family members, the spiritual community, the people who see people, because so often they are invisible and so often they're marginalized. But the power of one person seeing you is immense. Seen. Physical abuse, bullying, so much bullying, exclusion, institutionalization. So and repeated foster care placements. One of my first experiences in the field, I was going into the institution. I'm trying to tell different stories because I don't want Shelley to be bored. I'm really trying, Shelley. Good. Because if you tell the same, that's a sign of being an old person, because sometimes I tell the same stories over and over again and I say, you don't know this story. And then they're like, we've heard it 20 times. So I usually tell a story about my first week in the job, seeing how people were so marginalized and being so shocked. It was right around the same time that I was really getting into my Buddhist practice, which I can never talk about, and I can talk about here. This is so fun. I chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, and I was just really starting to read the writings of Daisaku Ikeda and learn about it. And our philosophy, similar to many spiritual philosophies, right? Everybody is a Buddha. Everybody is divine. Everybody is precious. And I'm like, but they're treating these people like crap. Hold on. And we were run by someone who was a reverend, ran the agency. And I was like, something isn't adding up. And then I went into the institution because my new job, I had many jobs. When you're in a startup, you have about 5 or 6 jobs. I was also HR and broke every rule I now know of HR. But I started going into the institution because my job was also intake. And we saw people treated worse than animals. People were screaming. They were sitting in their own excrement. There was a big gym with a drain in the middle of it. And I never understood why, until I was told I had to write a behavior plan for a fellow named James. And James, they said, he's non-compliant. That's a word I hate. That needs to be thrown out of the dictionary. Who's compliant? Please. Is that your goal in life? I want to be compliant. I just want to comply. No. And yet we put this often on people with disabilities. So that was the behavior plan I had to write, because James would not take a shower, would not wear clean clothes, who would take his dirty clothes out of the laundry and put them back on, right? And I was supposed to get him to clean up. So I wrote the behavior plan. I'm like, oh yes, I can do this. We analyzed, what are his rewards that he would work for. We said, okay, James, we're going to give you a soda. And James looked like a pirate, right? He was this real gruff guy, and he would say, "Hey, how you doing?" And his arm was like this, right? And now I know he had Jobert's syndrome, but we hadn't even identified that then. But he had a genetic disorder that you could really see. And we said, "James, we're going to give you a soda for taking a shower." He said, "Sure, sounds good." And he would go turn the water on, turn the water off, took my shower, getting my soda. Never took the shower. Then we said, "Okay, this isn't working. James will pay you for taking a shower." So we'd give him money. And he'd go in, turn the shower on, turn the shower off. "I'm taking my money." That's when we found out he knew how to get into the med cabinet where we kept the money. Couldn't do anything to get him to clean up. James had been in the institution since he was 2 years old because his mother was told, as so many moms are, the best thing you can do for your child is put them in an institution, forget you ever had them. It's better for you and your family. So my plan didn't work. Nothing I did worked until James met Sarah. "There's a new girl at the day program and I'm going to marry her." That's what he said. I'm like, "Oh, James, that's great." "Yeah, I think I'm in love." And she said, "I'm going to propose." And he took his money. When staff took him to the Kmart, he got a little ring. And a couple weeks later, I talked him into slowing down. I'm like, "Get to know her first, okay? Get to know her." And a couple weeks later, he proposed. He said, "I want to make you my wife." And she said, "No way, you stink." Because he really did. And guess who started wearing clean clothes? Taking showers. He even shaved. We got him an electric shaver, and he would put that Old Spice cologne, the old-fashioned one. You could smell him a mile away. Would just pour the whole thing on him. And I'm happy to tell you that he did get married. This is why. Remember I said a reverend ran the agency? Well, the reverend found out that if he did some kind of priestly duty, he wouldn't have to pay taxes. So he married a bunch of people, which did not work out for most of them, but it was great for James and Sarah. They really did well. So James started slipping back, and that's when I had to do couples counseling. That's when I learned I had to go back at my old textbooks and say, "Okay, how do we do couples counseling? Let's do it with these guys." And I'm working with them, and James says, here's why I didn't want to take a shower. Because every night at Rosewood, they would line us all up, and we would have to strip naked, and we'd get hosed down. I mean, these are people with dignity. And that's why there was a drain in the middle of the gym. He said, "I don't like the way water feels when it's sprayed on me." So, and I've learned so much. I was so humbled. Like, I thought I was writing a plan to make you clean up because you didn't realize how important it was to be clean. And this is really bad. If you were smelly and dirty, you wouldn't get sexually abused by the older boys. Like, oh my goodness, this goes so deep. But I'm happy to tell you that James really healed so much from his trauma through that marriage, through that love. Love, purpose, mission, spirituality. This is how people heal. And now I have about 100 more slides. I promise I'll get through them. But the big T, because I'm just telling stories, because all these people that I know were my teachers. And they taught me to go deeper. And they taught me that people need love. They need spirituality. They need support. They need purpose. And then we heal. But if I'm thinking I have to fix them, and I went back to school, and I'll tell you why I went back. I had my master's, but I had to get my PhD because I kept saying to my psychologist that was supervising me, these people need therapy. And over again, I heard, "Oh, you can't do therapy with people with the R word. Doesn't work." So I started doing, "Come here, how are you feeling?" And then those stories came out. And so I went back to school, got certified, supervised people to do therapy. And what I've realized, therapy is really important and really helps, but it's also the support you get. on a day-to-day. And when you have staff that care, when you have family that care, when you have a spiritual community who accepts you and you feel you belong, that's the package. That's what's needed, right? And then the therapy can make a difference. Small traumas can be just as impactful as big traumas. And we know that the little t traumas can add up. Being excluded, being bullied, which is really a big T for the person experiencing it. Betrayal, often there's gaslighting, there's betraying. I think, this is Tamika. She was someone that was referred to me after a sexual assault. I am here to say, I believe the biggest source of vulnerability is not having an intellectual disability. It's loneliness. And I've seen that over and over again, that people of all these crisis counseling I hear again and again, as I heard from Tamika, he said he would be my boyfriend. And Tamika told her team every year, what do you want for a goal? I want a boyfriend. What do you want to work on? Getting a boyfriend. And the team would be like, okay, then we're going to work on your cooking goal, right? Right? I have a cooking goal. It's not to cook. And it's going really well. I got set back during COVID, but I'm back on track. So cooking goal, I want a boyfriend. She lived with several old ladies. And that's when I was running a singles group. And they never came because the staff would say, oh, our ladies don't want to come. No, Tamika wanted to, but they couldn't figure out, well, what do we do with these other women who didn't want to come? No one was listening to her. And that's often our biggest problem. But when this man said, I want to be your boyfriend, that was the magic. Those were the words. And if she had a relationship, she would have said to him, I got a boyfriend. And oftentimes people are shut down. Many places I go, people aren't allowed to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. They have one. No, that's okay, but you can't have them in your room. You can't have sex. You can't get married. So that's the real source of vulnerability. My friend Sheila almost gave all her money away to some guy. We're like, Sheila, he's not stranded at an airport. You don't even know him, but he said he loved me. She's very smart. She didn't figure it out, but she's so lonely. Yeah. So I believe our biggest problem in this field, the biggest source of vulnerability to abuse is the loneliness. And if we can address that and change that, and if we can support people in being a part of a community, meeting others, connecting with others, we're going to solve so much. And all these stories have to do with people connecting with others, right? With the community, with the relationship. And that's when the healing starts. And Tamika did really well. We had about 9 months of therapy. We worked on building a positive sense of self, helping her. And then she said, I don't need to see you anymore. And she went to the agency and said, you need to move me. I want to be with young people, and I want to date people, and I want to go out, and I want to have fun. And she demanded it, and they moved her, and it was like they put her in this house with all these young women. It was like Girls Gone Wild. It was great. They had a lot of fun until COVID. But I heard they're back up and running. They're having fun. So, she needed to be empowered to say, no, I'm standing up for myself, and I want a relationship, and this time I mean it, and I'm not going to just be living with old people. And I've heard she's doing great. So we can assume trauma. We know there's PTSD. We know families have trauma, and it often begins with the diagnosis, right? Let me go back to that. So many families have told me too, the rest of the family backed away from them. They lost their friends. They had to negotiate a system that was so hard to negotiate. And families need support. And what often happens is families are seen as difficult, right? Oh, they're difficult. Oh, you know them. You can't please them. We had one difficult family, quote unquote, in this agency where I worked. right? And they would always call our boss. I ran psych and nursing. They would complain. They'd go, the guy, they were both doctors. So they would complain about everything we did. They would go to all the appointments. The one doctor would change the medication. We're like, you can't do that. No. He'd change it anyway. And then he'd report to our boss if we weren't doing things right. We didn't use restraints. I believe restraints traumatize people. And he wanted to use restraints for his son who had autism. He had, the regressive autism where he was fine until 2. And then they say we lost him. And I didn't get it. I didn't get the level of trauma that the family had. And we were just angry with them because they were always reporting us to our boss. They would say we need to start restraining him. We're like, we are not going to restrain this guy. They would say we got the, wrong doctor, wrong meds, and they would go and change things and complain about the nurses. And we would talk about them. I hated seeing the email coming in. And then one day we were at a meeting, and their son, was doing well. And we were just talking about the fact that there were holes in the wall, because he would get very excited and he'd punch the wall, right? He would jump up and down. He had autism and he was non-speaking, but he would be very excited. But he was doing great, as long as we could watch Mary Poppins once a day, things would go fine. And we learned that. And we watched a lot of Mary Poppins. And, he liked to run, so we would go on the track. So we thought he was doing great, except there were a lot of holes in the wall. And we're talking about this at the meeting. And the mother, who is a well-known neonatal doctor in our Baltimore area and a speaker, bursts into tears and starts sobbing. And the father, instead of comforting her, looks down. And he's frozen. And I was like, oh my gosh. Oh no. Are you okay? What's going on? And she's sobbing and she says, you're going to discharge him. I know you are. I know you are. And he'd had this long history of being kicked out of every school, every program. And he was finally in this horribly restrictive residential program where they restrained people, which was why it turns out they wanted us to restrain them, because they were so scared that we would fail and we would kick him out. And then it was my aha moment. She's so traumatized and she doesn't feel supported by us because we're in these stupid little power struggles all the time. So I met her for dinner, and then we would have lunch. Just said, let me be your friend. And I learned to be humbled, And then my mother went into an assisted living and developed dementia. And I became the difficult family member. I was a real pain in the neck. And that was a really important experience for me, because I was like, I don't like the way she looks. What is she eating? Come on. This sugar is not good for her. I was a real pain. And I got it. So families need support. Staff needs support. And instead of trying to fix people, we all have to support each other. You guys know this. You're the spiritual community. And this is the message that has to get out, so the staff can absorb trauma. Actually, interesting point where we now know in the field of intellectual disabilities, we have a higher level of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, in our workforce than any other workforce. An important study was done by John Kiesler. He looked at a number of workforces. In our world, we have more people with childhood traumas, adverse childhood experiences, than in other workforces. So people come to us with trauma, right? And then we're asking them to work with traumatized people. And we can pretty much assume trauma with people with disabilities because we know they've been bullied. That's trauma. We know they've been excluded. And we see symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Often I talk about each symptom and lay it out, because the behaviors we're looking at are often just symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. They're not anything anyone's doing to manipulate or seek attention. It may be inadvertent communication, but it's often not deliberate communication. It's a trauma response. And that's what we see over and over again. And when we support people and give that nurturing, rather than trying to fix the behavior, go deeper and nurture that person, as we see in these spiritual communities, people heal. People heal. That's why you are all so important, because you get that. And that message has to get out. Not to fix anybody, but to support and to help heal. So let's see. This video, hopefully it'll show, this was riveting to me. This is a fellow named Frank Stevens. And he is amazing, and he is a great advocate. And he talked about a topic that I didn't realize a lot of people get. And when you see this video, you'll know what I'm talking about. Here you go. Wow, right? Please don't prick us with the needle and kill us. Wow. I was so shaken. Like, imagine knowing that your, whatever type of your genetics is the type of person that is being targeted to be aborted. And wow. I've had families say to me that their doctor, one family in North Carolina told me they got the amniocentesis, that they were positive for Down syndrome, and the doctor called them 6 times trying to schedule an abortion. They finally had to say, we will sue you. We're calling our lawyer, and we will sue you if you give us one more phone call. Leave us alone. I mean, there's such a push. And there's so many things now that we can detect with amniocentesis, Fragile X, spina bifida, so many things. And it's not okay, right? So I thought that was so moving. I can't even imagine if, my type of person, Greek, genetics and this and that, oh, we got to get rid of them. How does that make you feel? People need a sense of self, and we're up against so much. Stephen Hawking says the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. When we think we know, we don't know. It's when we're curious and we're open to find out. Yeah. And I believe that there's 3 ingredients that everybody needs in order to heal. Everyone needs to feel emotionally safe. In many settings, serving people with disabilities, folks don't feel emotionally safe. There's still a lot of institutions throughout America where people don't feel emotionally safe, right? Where they're locked down, they're excluded. People need to know the people around them care about them, and they're a part of things. They need to belong. And that's what safety is. Connected. People need relationships. And I believe it's so important that it's not just the staff, it's not just the family. They need relationships with peers. They need love. They need friendship. That's how we heal. And that's how we create a life. And then finally, they need to be empowered. They need voices that are heard, right? To be heard. I hope everybody here has someone who listens to them. You think about what that person does for you, right? They're not telling you what's wrong with you, hopefully. They're not correcting you. And then when you are really heard, you feel stronger. And you can kind of figure out what you need to do. Like, okay, as you hear yourself talk, you chart your way forward. And yet so many folks aren't really heard and aren't really listened to. So they need that empowerment of having a voice, of having real choices, a world that truly is person-centered for them. So these are the 3 ingredients for healing that I swear by and I believe in. And in fact, when I'm working with a case or a situation where there's a new behavioral issue, we go back to this triangle. Is there a reason this person isn't feeling safe? Is there a connection that's been broken? So often it's a staff who've left or something, a friend who's gone, right? And then Did they lose choice? Do they have choice? Do they have agency in their life? Are they able to move their life forward, or is it shut down? And oftentimes we find when there's a new issue coming up, it's a reflection of ways in which they're not feeling safe, not empowered, not connected, that isolation. So we want to always look at that in these ways of healing. Relationships heal. The Harvard Men's Study showed us that relationships actually were they looked at men from Harvard. I'm sure many of you know this study, and they looked at men from poorer section of Boston, and they followed them their whole lives. The happiest people, they did many measures of fulfillment and joy. And just a large group from Harvard, a large group of people, larger group from poor section, and followed them throughout their lives. The happiest people were not the richest. They were not the ones with the highest positions. There was one who was a president who got shot and killed. The happiest people were the ones with the best relationships. The ones who said, I have great friends. Or, I have a good marriage. I have people I can count on. That's what we have to address in our world. That people with disabilities are often way too lonely, way too isolated. They need their spiritual community. They need relationships. They need connection. And that's what the Harvard Men's Study showed us. This is what the key to happiness is. Access to treatment is a human right. Here's Elena. I'm going to do this quickly. I am going to make it to questions and answers. I'm determined. But I do want to just show you, because treatment is so important, and still everywhere I go, people say, therapists say, we can't do therapy with these people because we're not trained. And guess what? There's no training. Darn. I do a training now. I tell stories all day, and then I give them a certificate. Say, oh, you got your certificate. Congratulations. Go do it. I always say, are you trained in working with humans? Well, then you qualify. Congratulations. A guy named Brian Talent says it's actually a cultural competency. Learn the culture. Learn the culture. Learn that person's culture. And people need therapy. This is Elena. For years, I saw her as very angry all the time, didn't want to do anything. And we started a healing center for folks where we knew they had trauma, and we did intensive therapy from September to June, 3 days a week. People who didn't want to work, who didn't want to go to a day program, didn't want to volunteer, didn't want to do anything. And we did group therapy, and we did a drum circle, and we did music therapy. We had a music therapist come once a week, and then we had art. We did all kinds of expressive therapies. And Elena kept saying to us, I don't do music. I don't play drums. I don't do this. And she was so angry. I used to think she didn't like us. Maybe we, ticked her off. Found out that anger, like so many people I've worked with, the core of it was self-hate. And that I see that with trauma. They turn it on themselves. Shame and self-hate. Bad things happen to me because I'm a bad person. See, I'm a bad person. And we knew that she had watched her stepfather stab and kill her mother when she was 13 in Baltimore City. And that was a horrible trauma, and that's why we put her in the program. But what we didn't know was she had actually had a beautiful relationship in the group home with another woman who that had really helped her to heal. And had been really therapeutic and wonderful and lovely. But then she told the group, she'd never told anyone this, and all that anger came out, and she said, I loved Mary and I killed her. The group was, what? You killed her? I killed her. And then she told the story that they were eating at dinner and Mary wouldn't eat. And she said, you have to eat, you have to eat, you have to eat. And Mary stuffed food into her mouth and choked. And that was the anger. I'm a horrible killer. I killed the woman I love. And hadn't had therapy, hadn't had anything. She's in her 50s, and nobody had helped her with any of it, the mother or that relationship. And it all came out in group. Group therapy is so effective. And then we did the grief counseling. I really strongly believe in grief counseling. And I'm going to show you real quickly her talking about doing this memory box, honoring Mary and her life, and what a different we never saw her smile. She was a different person after that. And she went back and she started working. She started doing all kinds of things. And I'm just going to skip to here because I think it's very important in this process of healing that we help people to have a positive sense of self and identity. And all those staff I told you about, those job coaches, those people, they all held up a mirror to show someone their best self. Yes, you can. Yes, you are. You are someone. You count. You're important. You belong. Ultimately, happiness rests on how you establish a solid sense of self or being. And everybody deserves that happiness, to know who you are, to feel like you are someone, you belong somewhere, be it a job, a relationship, a spiritual community. That's how we heal. So at this point, I have 4 minutes for questions. That was the goal. Anybody? Oh, yes. Oh, thank you. Oh, look, she's got.
I know I already asked one, but so I'm not a therapist. I work with adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities through a church, and have been doing reading books like The Body Keeps the Score. And there's a lot of trauma and grief that comes out in the course of knowing people over years. And I'm just curious, based on what I've read, that the talk therapy is really not necessarily available to people when they're dealing with PTSD. And so I was just curious, you mentioned some of the music therapy, the drum circles, and I don't know if you can give any more details about what you use, strategies that you use that are helpful, particularly in grief work, and if someone has a loss that's traumatic, or discloses to you that they have a history of abuse.
Thank you for that great question. That's the question, right? What do we do? How do we help people heal? And not to promote it, but thank you, AAIDD. They just published my last book. It's got a bunch of exercises, social stories. I just designed this for people who are grieving, for people who have been bullied, for people who have been left out. It's called Trauma and Healing. And I had a brilliant editor, she just retired, who said, let's make this accessible for anyone working with people. So it's not just for therapists. So it's on 2 different levels where therapists can use it, all the materials in this book, and then anyone can. So, and I also, on my website, KarynHarvey.org, I've developed through the years a number of materials. And one of the materials I'm really proud of is called the Happiness Assessment. We've used it for 20 years. We also have something where we just assess, let's sit with you and figure out what makes you happy, and let's have a plan for happiness rather than a plan on improving your behavior. Forget that. Happy people aren't putting holes in the walls. And I have something on the website called, it's the Happiness Assessment on KarynHarvey.org. The Goodbye Book is a workbook we do to honor the person that they're grieving, but it also helps to build them back up. You know, this is how I was for this person, and this is who I am. And I've used that for about 20 years as well. So thank you. Everybody's going to think I planted you with that question so I could promote my book. Thank you. Anybody else? Rashida.
I think everyone can hear me. Okay, so the story about Rashida, it was fascinating to see all this healing, but to see that she started as a child that was abused, and she's going back in this circle to continue with people, with children that are abused. Oh my God.
And she sought that out. She said, they serve special kids there, and that's where I want to work. And
Exactly.
she thought that out.
And it was just your triangle that you showed in the, yes.
Oh.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wish I could
Can I-
be there with me.
Thank you so much for your lecture. And you've mentioned something that I wanted to ask, actually, which was about the triangle, safety, connections, and empowerment. I just wanted to ask whether you could speak a bit more about how potentially institutions of religion, so churches, could create environments that facilitate this triangle.
Oh, thank you. That's a beautiful question. Thank you. I think so much of, if you look at the triangle, I'll pull it back up. There's two things that are universal. Oops, I can't pull it back up. Never mind. Sorry, guys. Okay. So if you look at that safety, empowerment, and connection, what's a universal? Belonging. So a community that really lets someone know they belong there. You know, in my Buddhist community, sometimes I see that when people are outgoing, but sometimes I see people with disabilities who aren't very good at connecting with people, just being in a corner somewhere, and I'm always working on that. You know, we have to change that. That belonging, come with us. That belonging and listening. Being heard makes you feel safe, makes you connected, and gives you power because you have your voice. So that inclusion, real inclusion, not just, oh, look at us, we have a person with a disability over here, but you know, that belonging and a role and a purpose, and you're here. And then that listening. So thank you for that beautiful question. Okay, almost on time I ended, almost on time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hello? It's on? Thank you, Karyn, so much. I also want to acknowledge that some of the topics, some of the things in your presentation may have been triggering or may feel uncomfortable, and we are a community with where I hope everyone feels that sense of psychological safety. If you wish to talk to someone, we have Becca Anderson here, who will be there to support you. Karyn will be with us through today and part of tomorrow.